The river was never still, even when the fields held their breath, even when the stars dimmed, even when the wind fell silent as a corpse. The Missouri carried its own voice, low, endless, like a hymn too old for men to know. The Osage gave warning. They told it as a tale passed down in hushed tones. This water eats secrets. This water does not forgive. This water remembers what men forget. Children were kept away from the banks after sundown, for the Osage said that at night, the drowned licked the edges of the earth, tasting the soil, waiting for another to pull beneath, but the settlers came. Hungry for land, hungrier than for warning, and so they built. Cabins, fields, smokehouses, too close to the black mouth of the river. The Missouri did not welcome them. On moonless nights, its surface turned darker than coal, darker than raven feathers, darker than the eyes of the newly buried. Those who lingered too near heard more than water. Chains dragging across stone, breath stolen into mud, prayers cut short, swallowed by the deep, not words, only weight. The weight of the unforgiven. Some nights the river raged. It tore at the banks, gnashing its black teeth. Trees toppled, livestock vanished, and those who tried to save them were dragged screaming into the churn. Other nights it was calm. Too calm, a mirror of the heavens, but the reflection was never right. The stars bent, the moon sagged. The sky itself looked wounded in the water. Mothers shuttered their homes when the river lay flat. They told their children, do not look outside. Do not listen. The drowned walk then. They drip at the threshold. One boy refused. He mocked their fear. He swore he would swim by torchlight, laughing at ghosts. They watched him leap from the bank. His flame burned bright against the black, and then silence, no cry, no splash. At dawn they found his torch tangled in reeds, its flame still burning. The boy was never seen again, but his laughter returned. Years later, carried by fog across the fields, thin, hollow, rolling from no human throat. The land itself leaned toward the river. Trees crooked their bodies as if listening. Roots clawed the soil, desperate to pull free. Branches hung long and skeletal, dipping toward the current like fingers. Bodies went into that water. Stones tied to their ankles, prayers still warm on their lips. But the Missouri never kept its dead. It spit them back, blue-lipped, eyes open, mouths shaped in curse. Boatmen spoke of mists that rose without warning, dense, suffocating. Inside the fog, they heard paddles striking water, boards groaning. But no craft appeared. Then came the voice, a woman's voice, sweet, lulling, calling men by name, and always, they followed. They walked into the current as if entranced. When the mist thinned, only ripples remained. Still the settlers stayed. The soil was too rich, too dark, too generous, but the river gave them visions. At dawn, pale women knelt at the banks, their hair dripping, their hands cupped to drink black water. When approached, they dissolved. Vanishings left only the smell of wet ash. One neighbor told of a child, a girl clutching a doll with no eyes. She dipped its head into the water again and again, humming softly. When he called to her, she turned. Her face was swollen. Her mouth poured mud, and the ground where she stood bore no prints. The Osage had warned, rivers eat secrets. But not this river. The Missouri did not eat. It brewed, it festered. It remembered, and in 1855 it remembered her, Celia. That summer the waterline swelled. Rains fattened the current. But at her cabin the river rose faster than anywhere else. Always higher. At night, she heard it breathe. Slow, deep, like lungs beneath the ground. She heard chains, dragging, footsteps pacing the riverbed. Neighbors swore they saw lanterns drifting outside her home, blue flames. Lanterns borne by hands below the surface. One stormed night she sat by her hearth. But the hymn came through her walls, low, relentless. She pressed her palms to her ears. Still it whispered, not outside, inside, behind her eyes. Come to the water. The water knows. Her candle died. Darkness fell, and in the doorway a figure stood, dripping, head bowed. Skin pale as bone, it raised its hand, swollen, trembling, black at the nails, and it pointed, always, always pointing, toward the river. By morning, footprints were found, small, bare, pressed wet into the mud, leading from her cabin to the river's mouth, and there, beside the current, they found a doll's head, its eyes gouged away, its face tilted toward the black water. The Missouri carried its hymn louder that day, louder than church bells, louder than the voices of the living, and it carried a name, Celia. The house was blind. It stood on a low rise above the fields, its boards gray with age, its roof sagging as though bowed beneath unseen weight. No windows faced the sun. None looked upon the road. Only narrow slits peered into the woods as if the house itself distrusted the light. Settlers muttered when they passed it. Some spat, others crossed themselves. No good comes from a house that hides its face from heaven. They said its builder feared God's gaze, that he nailed each board with trembling hands, praying the daylight would never reach inside. In the storms, its rafters moaned and its beams rattled, as though the house itself wanted to shake loose the memory of what it had been made to shelter. At dusk, when the sky bled red across the horizon, shadows clung too long to its walls. Birds circled it but never landed. Dogs howled when dragged near, straining at their leashes until their throats foamed white. The door never stayed shut. Settlers swore they latched it, but when they looked back it hung open, yawning black into the hall. More than one traveler said they saw movement in that darkness, something tall, bent, shifting slow as though learning to walk. Inside, the air was foul. Old wood carried a sour scent like rot beneath floorboards. The hearth was cold stone, yet ashes lay upon it fresh and gray, as though something unseen still warmed itself at night. Children whispered that if you pressed your ear against the walls, you could hear voices. Not one voice, but many. Whispered confessions, gasped prayers, choked laughter that rose into sobs. Forgive me. Forgive me. He made me do it. Others swore the walls pulsed, soft beneath their palms as though the house itself breathed. No one claimed it. No settler cut it down. They built fences around it, barns beside it, but the house remained untouched, as though rooted deeper than its foundations. One winter, a woman vanished from her bed. The snow showed her steps leading only to the blind house. None returned. None dared to break its door. But for weeks after, neighbors heard her crying in the wind. Not carried through the woods, not across the fields, inside. Inside the walls of that sightless home, the preacher condemned it from the pulpit. A house with no windows is a coffin, a place to bury sin before its time. He warned the faithful never to step across its threshold, but that very night lantern light flickered in its loft, a glow warm as firelight, though no one lived within. Some swore the preacher's voice was heard there too, reading verses no Bible contained. The house shifted with the seasons. In spring it dripped though no rain touched its roof. In summer its beams swelled with heat, groaning like a body pinned under weight. In autumn leaves piled at its door even when the wind blew the other way. And in winter, oh, in winter it sang. Low, mournful, the sound of timbers creaking in unison. A dirge of wood and nail. Some settlers claimed to hear words in that moan. Some claimed it spoke names. One night, a girl dared her brother to step inside. He crossed the threshold, laughing, bold. But silence followed. She waited. She called. No answer. Finally, she peered through the doorway. Her brother stood in the hall. Still. Frozen. His face turned toward the wall. His mouth moved, but no sound came. When she seized his arm, it was cold. His eyes rolled white. He staggered forward as though pushed, his lips torn by the whisper forced through them. Not mine, not my hands. I did not strike her. The girl dragged him back, shrieking, and the house groaned behind her, the beams rattling like teeth. The door slammed of its own accord, the sound cracking like a rifle shot. Her brother lived, but he never spoke again. His mouth opened at times, shaping words, but only dust fell out. After that, folk whispered of the house as if it lived. It took in sins. It chewed them. It spat them back in broken tongues, and some swore it had grown hungrier. A farmer once found a calf torn to pieces on its doorstep, as if offered. Another claimed his wife stood outside at dawn, her face blank, her nightdress torn, her feet bare against frost. She would not say how she came there. Only wept, muttering, "He made me go. He made me." None asked who he was. By 1855, the house stood swollen with silence. Its timbers sagged, heavy with secrets too foul for earth, and it waited for her, for Celia. Neighbors claimed she walked past it more than once that year, her face turned away, her pace quickened. But the door would not stay shut. It swung open as she passed, breathing a low groan like wood remembering pain. One storm-thick night, smoke rose from its chimney. Blue smoke, bitter as burned iron. Those who looked swore they saw figures through the slits in the walls, faces pressed against gaps where no window should be. Pale faces, eyes wide, mouths open, whispering against the wood. A child who saw them fainted in the snow. When she woke, she spoke in a man's voice. "We are still here, the house waits still. Its rafters moan in the wind, its halls drip with old confessions. Its walls throb with breath no living body gives, and if you stand close enough, if you dare, you will hear the voices, always whispering, always saying the same name. Celia." The branch should have been holy. In the back country, elders taught that a hearth stick placed by fire and smoke could keep spirits from creeping through the cracks at night. Hickory, oak, or ash, it did not matter. What mattered was the blessing, the prayer spoken low, the crossing of palm and flame. Without it, the stick was nothing more than wood, but in this house no blessing was spoken. No prayer was whispered. The branch leaned against the hearth, splintered, blackened, mute. It was not a charm. It was a burden. Some said it had been broken from a tree struck by lightning, its wood stinking of heaven's wrath. Others claimed it was carved from gallows timber, carrying the groan of a hanged man in its grain. Whatever its making, the stick watched. It stood beside the hearth like a sentinel, leaning but never falling, its shadow long across the floor. The firelight licked its length. Red coals glowed against its splinters, and smoke seemed to cling to it longer than to any other wood. Folk who saw it swore they smelled not pine, not oak, not hickory, but flesh, burnt and bitter. In old lore, the hearth was the center of a home, where bread was baked, where children gathered, where mothers hummed to soothe the dark. But in this house, the hearth was no cradle. It was a mouth, a place that swallowed screams and spit out silence. Celia knew this. She heard the creak of rafters above her bed. She felt the press of shadow on her chest at night. She saw the branch by the hearth leaning, waiting, like it had been placed for her alone. Sometimes she thought it leaned closer when she passed. Sometimes she swore it whispered. Not in words, not yet, but in crackle and groan. The dry voice of timber promising it remembered every hand that struck in anger, every lash, every cry that bled into fire. The old women in the quarters muttered warnings. A stick unblessed is not safe. It carries what men do in anger. And if it drinks blood, but they never finished the thought, the branch remained, unmoved, watching. One night, when the wind rattled the shutters and the master's boots stamped heavy on the boards, the fire in the hearth refused to die. Though no hand fed it, the flames licked higher, orange tongues bending toward the stick, the air filled with sparks, red motes that hovered too long, that glowed like eyes before winking out. The master's shadow loomed over her, thick as smoke. His breath carried whiskey, his hands thick with demand. "Girl," he rasped. "Come." Celia's body stiffened. Her heart beat like a drum caught in thunder. She glanced at the hearth, at the branch leaning there, blackened, sharp at one end, heavy at the other. The fire glowed against it, making it gleam as though oiled. The rafters above groaned. The walls seemed to lean inward. Even the air tasted of ash. The voice of her grandmother hissed in her head. "If a stick drinks blood, it will never be only wood again." Her hand reached, trembling. Cold sweat beaded her lip. The branch was rough, biting into her palm, its splinters sharp as teeth. The master's boots scraped closer. His shadow stretched across her face. "You belong to me." His voice was low, almost a growl. "You breathe because I let you breathe." And the fire roared. Celia swung. The stick cracked against bone with a sound too loud, too final, too heavy to be only wood striking flesh. He fell groaning, the whiskey scent spilling with him. Blood splattered across the hearthstone, steaming as it touched the heat. The fire licked at it eagerly, swallowing it whole. The stick dripped red, but the blood did not fall. It clung. It soaked deep into the grain, darkening the wood. Celia's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she swore the stick pulsed in her hand, alive, feeding, remembering. The master writhed. His voice was no longer command, but a wet gasp, bubbling, desperate. "Help!" Another swing silenced him. Skull-meeting splinter, bone shattering like dry timber. Celia's arms trembled. Her eyes blurred. She struck again, and again, until the shadow on the floor no longer moved, until the only sound was her own ragged breath, the hiss of fire, the groan of wood above. The hearth crackled. Sparks spat onto the blood-soaked floor. Smoke curled low as though bowing to her. She dropped the stick. It did not fall flat. It stood leaning once more against the hearth, red-stained, gleaming in the firelight. Waiting, watching. The air grew heavy, thick with iron and ash. The walls whispered, not with wind, but with voices. Men's voices. Women's cries. The voices of all who had been struck, beaten, silenced. They rose together in a dirge, soft, unending. Celia pressed her hands over her ears. It did not stop. She stumbled back, her eyes fixed on the stick. Its shadow crawled up the wall, taller than the fire should have cast, long as a gallows beam stretching into the rafters. The master's body lay broken at her feet. His eyes open, staring not at her but at the branch. His lips twitched. His last breath hissed, carried not as plea, not as curse, but as confession. He made me do it. The hearth flared, the body convulsed once, then stilled. Celia fled the room, her bare feet slipping in blood, her breath torn and frantic. Behind her the stick waited, red-stained, gleaming as though polished, leaning once more in its place beside the hearth. And it whispered now. Clear as fire, more. The fire should have died. Wood burns, flesh chars, smoke rises, and then all is ash, cold, gray, forgotten. That is the way of things. But in this house the hearth defied its nature. The flames lingered not in brightness but in hunger, curling inward, gnawing at what was already gone. Neighbors muttered of witch fire. They said such flames eat more than wood, more than flesh, more than bone. They eat memory. They eat sin. And they never dim until justice is named. The air was thick for days after the master's disappearance. Smoke clung to the fields, though no fire burned outside. Children coughed at night, tasting ash on their tongues. Chickens refused their feed, their feathers stinking as though singed. Men rode past the house and would not look at its chimney. Women spat in the dust, muttering prayers, warning their children not to linger by the smoke that curled backward, sinking instead of rising, whispering in a tongue no one claimed to know. Inside, the hearth glowed. Ashes should cool. They should gray, scatter, crumble under breath, but here they pulsed with a dim ember light. Even in daylight, when the fire seemed dead, the ashes glowed faintly red as if coals still breathed beneath. Celia watched it. Every hour, every night, she stirred the embers with iron tongs, but they never cooled. She shoveled ash into the yard, burying it deep, only to find the hearth filled again by dawn. And the smoke. Oh, the smoke, it no longer rose. It curled back into the room, thick as fog, coiling low across the floorboards, seeping into the cracks. When Celia bent low, it spoke. Not loud, not clear, but it spoke. We are here. We do not leave. We wait. She covered her ears. She pressed cloth over her mouth. Still the smoke slid into her lungs, filling her with whispers, with voices that did not belong to her. The neighbors saw her once through the slats. She knelt before the hearth, face blackened, lips moving. They thought she prayed. But no prayer sounded like that. Her voice rose and fell in strange syllables, guttered like a dying flame, crackled like fire catching on green wood. One whispered, "She speaks the language of the smoke." But none dared intervene. The old women remembered other tales. They said a fire uncooled was a wound unhealed. It was punishment, drawn out, fed daily by guilt and silence. They muttered that if the fire ate flesh, the spirit lingered in the smoke, tethered to the hearth until reckoning was made. The preacher thundered that only witchcraft could explain it. "A fire that will not die is no work of God," he roared. "It is the devil's tongue licking still at sin." Yet even he would not enter. He stood on the road, sweating though it was winter, staring at the chimney where black smoke curled downward like a serpent. His Bible shook in his hands. One night the wind carried the smoke across the fields, bending it low over the river. Men fishing at the bank swore they heard the current hiss as though boiling. They swore pale faces pressed up from beneath the water's skin, mouths open, eyes red with ash. The Missouri itself seemed to drink the fire, but still the ashes glowed. Inside, Celia sat staring into the hearth, the stick beside it gleaming dark, red stains dried but never gone. The smoke swirled around her ankles, crept up her legs, pressed against her chest like a child climbing to be held. She whispered through her teeth, half in defiance, half in fear. "I did what I had to do." The smoke stirred. Like breath across her skin, we know, her throat closed. She pressed her palms against the floor. "I burned him. I burned what was left," the smoke hissed. "Not enough." Her body shook. He would have, The words strangled. The voices swallowed them. In the rafters, the timbers groaned. In the floorboards, the nails popped, straining. The whole house breathed as if with the fire. The stick fell against the stone with a clatter. Celia jerked, staring at it, the hearthlight painting it black and red, black and red. Its shadow stretched tall against the wall, long as gallows rope, sharp as an axe. The smoke thickened. Shapes moved within it. Faces, hands, bodies bent and broken, some small as children, some twisted like hung men, some crawling on limbs too many to count. Their mouths opened. From them came not words, but the sound of fire catching, roaring, then sputtering, then roaring again. Celia staggered back. Her heel struck the bodiless dark where the master had lain. For a heartbeat, she thought she felt his skull beneath her foot, caved, brittle, still wet. She screamed, but the house swallowed it. The smoke surged up the chimney then, but not outward. It poured against the stone, seeping down deeper, vanishing into places no eye could follow. When silence fell, the hearth still glowed, red, steady, patient. The ashes did not cool, and the whispers remained. The neighbors crossed themselves when they passed the house. They whispered that the smoke still bore faces, that its language grew clearer, louder, as though waiting for someone to listen. They whispered that Celia's eyes no longer looked at people but passed them into the fire. One said she was marked. Another said she was chosen. Another swore she was already gone. But all agreed on this. The fire would not rest, not until something greater was fed to it. Something more than wood, more than flesh, something older than justice. The smell came first, not sudden, not sharp, but creeping. A low rot that clung to the air, thickest at dusk when the light failed and the walls drew in their shadows. No matter how much lye was scattered, no matter how much lime was poured, the odor rose again. Neighbors said a guilty house cannot hold its secrets. It leaks them through the cracks like blood seeping through bandage. And this house was guilty. The boards swelled with damp. The nails sweated rust. When the wind pressed low across the fields, the smell carried sour and heavy, until even the dogs would not near. Celia smelled it most at night. When the embers dimmed in the hearth and the rafters creaked as though remembering each strike of the stick, the odor seeped up. It curled around her bed, pressed against her throat, wormed into her hair. It was not the smell of earth. Not the smell of animal. It was sweeter, fouler, like meat left too long in summer, like milk turned thick in heat. The floorboards trembled beneath her feet as she swept, as if something below shifted. Sometimes she thought she heard scratching, faint, like nails dragging across stone. Sometimes she thought she heard breath. The old women shook their heads when they heard. You can cover the dead in lime, girl, but lime don't fool the Lord or the devil. Celia scrubbed until her fingers bled. She boiled water, mixed it with herbs, poured it across the planks. The scent only rose stronger as though awakened, stirred. The men who passed whispered. One spat. That house stinks like judgment. They would not cross the threshold. But some swore they saw smoke not from the chimney, but from between the cracks of the porch. Thin gray threads rising, carrying with them the smell of rot. Celia pressed rags beneath the floor. She prayed. She whispered. She begged, stay down, stay gone. Let me be. But the smell only thickened. One night she woke choking. The odor was a hand around her throat, pressing her lungs, forcing her mouth open. She staggered to the hearth, coughing, gagging, clawing at the air. The smoke hung low, thick with stench, curling like black fingers, and then she heard it. A groan beneath the boards. A shifting weight. Her blood froze. She pressed her ear against the floor. The wood was warm. Beneath it, movement. The scrape of something dragging. The faintest whisper, not from smoke, but from below. Cold. So cold. She bit her fist to keep from screaming. The boards bulged, just slightly, then stilled. She shoved more lime between the cracks, hands shaking, her nails split and bleeding. She poured lye until her skin blistered. Still the smell rose, patient, unyielding, like breath from lungs that would not still. The neighbors began crossing the road to avoid the place. They said the house carried the stink of graveyards, of warfields, of plague pits. They said it clung to their clothes when they passed too near, followed them home, soured their milk, spoiled their bread. Some swore it was not smell at all, but spirit, the odor of damnation, marking the house as unclean. The preacher thundered once more. A body hidden speaks through scent, for the earth itself rejects injustice. But when pressed to act, he would not step near the porch. At night the whispers returned, he is not gone. He waits beneath. He remembers the stick, Celia curled into herself, rocking, covering her ears. But the words pressed through the cracks, thick as the smell, undeniable. One dusk, as the sun bled red across the river, the odor thickened until the whole house seemed to sweat it. The air shimmered. Flies battered against the walls, swarming from nowhere, black clouds that crawled along the glass. The boards swelled again, and this time, something seeped through, dark, tar-thick, smelling of iron. It oozed between the planks, slow but steady, spreading like spilled ink across the floor. Celia staggered back, choking, her eyes burning. The liquid bubbled once, releasing a hiss, half steam, half voice, not buried deep enough. She screamed then. She seized the poker from the hearth, striking the floor, splitting the wood, but the ooze only spread, creeping toward her bare feet. Her breath came fast, ragged. She dragged the rugs over the boards, shoved buckets of ash across the planks. Nothing stopped it. The smell filled her lungs, her blood, her very skin. When she collapsed sobbing, the ooze had already vanished, drawn back between the boards, leaving only the smell of something that should never have been unearthed. By morning, the neighbors saw smoke drifting not only from the chimney, but from every crack of the house. Black threads rising, carrying the odor far across the fields. One swore he heard a voice carried with it. Not Celia's voice. A man's, a broken rasp. I am still here. The smell did not fade. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever, and all who passed knew the truth in their bones. The floor would never keep him down. Every courtroom is a graveyard. The walls remember what has been spoken within them, oaths, lies, confessions, and they hold the words like bones buried shallow. But in Missouri, the old folk whispered something darker, that no tribunal is filled only by the living. The dead gather there too, every wronged soul, every silenced tongue, seated in the shadows, waiting to see if the law of men can touch the weight of their pain. When Celia was dragged in chains to the courthouse, the air seemed already heavy with more than bodies. The wood of the benches groaned like coffins. The rafters above creaked as if strained by unseen weight. And the shadows, oh, the shadows, stretched long behind the jurors, leaning close as though listening. The living sat stiff. 12 white men, pale in the heat of August, eyes sharp, lips thin, fingers drumming on their knees. They looked not at Celia but through her, as though she were an object, not a girl. But the shadows leaned differently. The shadows bent toward her. Neighbors who slipped in to watch whispered that the light fell strangely that day. The sun outside blazed hot, yet inside the chamber the air was dim, the shutters trembling as if something pressed against them. Faces were hard to see except for Celia's. She seemed to glow, though she bowed her head, chains glinting on her wrists. The judge cleared his throat, the sound like stone sliding. The case of the state of Missouri versus Celia. The words dropped heavy, tolling like a funeral bell. Celia did not raise her eyes. But she heard the whispers. Not from the crowd. From the corners. Not only you stand here. Not only your crime is weighed. We wait for the truth unsaid. The prosecutor spoke of law, of property, of rebellion. His voice dripped with fire and venom, painting Celia not as a girl but as a creature. A thing that had dared lift its hand against its owner. Each syllable struck like a lash, but the shadows stirred at his words. They shifted along the wall, long and thin, their edges trembling like stretched cloth. Behind him, a figure seemed to rise from the dark, its face hidden, its mouth wide, whispering. The jurors shifted uneasily. One wiped sweat from his brow, staring at the wall as if he saw something move. The defense rose, speaking timidly. His words stammered, half-hearted. He spoke of fear, of violation, of desperation. But his voice faltered, drowned by the creak of timbers above, and then came the silence. It fell sudden, sharp, as if every living soul in the chamber had been stilled by a single breath drawn all at once. Even the flies that swarmed in the heat froze mid-air. Celia felt it before she heard it. The tribunal of shadows. They leaned close, bending long, their mouths moving without sound. Then in unison they spoke, not aloud, not through ears, but through the bones of every body present. We see you. We weigh you. We judge what law refuses, Celia shuddered. Her chains rattled like bones. She closed her eyes. In that moment she felt not alone. She felt every woman taken against her will, every man lashed until his back split, every child torn from a mother's breast. They filled the room, heavy as storm, cold as earth. The prosecutor coughed, faltering mid-sentence, his papers slipping from his hands. The jurors glanced at each other, pale. Their shadows stretched longer and longer until they seemed to touch. And in the center of the floor, beneath the weight of eyes both living and dead, Celia lifted her head. Her voice was low. Steady, he came to me, again and again and again. The chamber rang with her words, not loud, not shouted, but final. The defense stirred, but no one spoke. The jurors' pens scratched like claws. The judge frowned, his face stone, his gavel raised, but the shadows leaned forward. We know. We were there, one juror gasped. His ink spilled across the page, spreading black like blood. The judge barked for order, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, but it came out hollow, thin, eaten by silence. And then Celia spoke again. Her eyes glowed like embers in the dim. I struck him. I burned him. And I would again. The words fell like fire into straw. The gallery gasped. The prosecutor staggered back. The defense sat frozen, his lips white, and the tribunal of shadows rose, tall, endless, their heads brushing the rafters. Their mouths opened wide, no teeth, no tongue, only darkness, and from them came a sound that shook the walls. Not a scream, not a word, a groan, a dirge. The weight of centuries poured into one note, too deep for human throat. The lanterns sputtered. The shutters clattered. The chains on Celia's wrists burned cold as ice. The judge struck the gavel, but the sound was drowned. His voice cracked as he pronounced the words, guilty. The tribunal stilled. One by one, the shadows leaned back, slipping into corners, melting into the wood. Their work was done, though not finished. Celia bowed her head once more. The fire of her words lingered in the air like smoke, but as she was dragged away, the gallery swore they saw the shadows linger behind the jurors. Leaning still, watching. And one by one, each juror's shadow seemed to move differently than the man himself. Heads tilted where no head turned. Fingers twitched where no hand stirred. They would leave the chamber pale, their eyes darting to corners, their lips trembling with words they dared not speak, for they had been judged. Too, and the tribunal of shadows is not bound by verdict. It waits, it follows, it whispers long after the living depart. The elm tree had stood longer than the town itself, its crown blotting the sky, its roots gripping earth like a clenched fist. Folk said it marked a crossroads where spirits never rested, where the lost gathered like fog, waiting for their names to be spoken again. Beneath its branches, dogs never howled, children never played. Even the crows kept their distance, circling but never perching as though the bark itself had burned them once. When the scaffold was raised beside it, the townsfolk crossed themselves, for they knew the elm had already drunk more sorrow than wood could bear. It had cradled too many ropes. That morning the square filled before the sun had fully risen. Men and women pressed close, faces pale, eyes downcast. Children were tugged along, though their mothers held them tight, whispering prayers into their hair. They said it was right for the young to see justice, though none said aloud what justice meant when the dead tree groaned heavier than any sermon. The gallows creaked as it was finished, raw pine lashed to black elm. Each hammer blow rang like a tolling bell, sending ripples across the crowd. By the time the rope was hung, the air felt bruised, too thick to breathe. Celia was brought forth in chains. The guards flanked her, faces set, but their eyes flickered to the elm as though afraid the tree itself watched them. The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers passed like moths' wings. She burned him. She raised her hand. God help her soul. But louder than the murmurs was the silence of the elm. It did not sway in the breeze. Its branches hung stiff, gnarled fingers against the sky. At its roots, the ground seemed to sink, as though the earth itself had given up, resisting the weight of all it had swallowed. Celia was led up the scaffold. Her steps were slow, heavy, as if each board resisted her. She did not raise her eyes to the rope. She looked instead at the horizon, where the fields bent under the sun, where freedom had always been just beyond reach. The preacher mounted the steps beside her, Bible in hand, voice cracking as he spoke of sin and redemption, of judgment and mercy. But each word rang hollow, swallowed by the elm's silence. Celia's lips parted. Her voice was no louder than a whisper. I struck him because he struck me. I burned him because he would not stop. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The preacher stiffened, but in the hush that followed, another voice came, low, drawn out, not human. We heard. The crowd froze. Eyes darted. None could say where the sound had come from. It was not the preacher, not Celia, not any among them. It came from the elm. The branches shuddered, though no wind touched them. Shadows rippled along the bark, twisting like figures in a dance. And at the edges of the crowd, some swore they saw faces in the wood, half-formed, mouths open wide as if caught mid-cry. The rope swung gently, though no hand had touched it. The guards hesitated. One crossed himself. Another muttered, "It's only the wind." But his words shook, his knuckles white on Celia's arm. The judge, pale in the heat, raised his hand. "Do it," the hangman stepped forward. His face was hidden by a black hood, though his shoulders slumped as if carrying more than his own weight. He placed the noose around Celia's neck, pulling it snug. Her breath quickened, but she did not cry out. She only closed her eyes. And then, low, steady, the whispers came again. "Not only she stands here, not only her neck is weighed. The elm remembers." The crowd shifted, pressing back as if the words had pushed them. Mothers clutched children tight. Men tugged at their collars. The preacher dropped his Bible, the pages fluttering open across the scaffold. The hangman froze. His hand trembled on the lever. His hood turned slowly toward the elm, for from the tree's hollow came a sound like rope straining, wood groaning, voices murmuring all at once. And then, clearer than all, "Hang her and you join her." The hangman staggered back, his hood slipping, his face pale as chalk. The judge shouted for order, his voice cracking. The guards pulled tight on Celia's chains. But the elm groaned louder, its branches shaking now as if alive. Leaves tore free, spiraling though the air was still. Celia's eyes opened. She looked not at the rope, not at the crowd, but at the tree. "You have seen," she whispered. You know, the words were not defiance. They were prayer. And the elm answered. Its trunk split with a sound like a scream. From the crack seeped smoke, dark and thick, curling like fingers. The scaffold boards shuddered. The rope swung wider, wider, until the knot itself frayed, strands snapping loose. The crowd screamed, stumbling back. Some fled. Others fell to their knees, faces buried in their hands. The guards released Celia as if burned. The preacher clutched his Bible to his chest, his lips moving, though no sound came. And Celia stood free, the rope slack at her neck, her chains unfastened as though the iron itself had grown brittle. The elm loomed above, smoke curling from its hollow, faces writhing in the bark. Some were men, some were women, some were children. All stared and all whispered. "We wait at the crossroads. We wait until all debts are paid." The gallows creaked. The boards buckled. With a crash, the scaffold collapsed, splintering into the roots. Dust rose like ash, swallowing the platform whole. When it cleared, Celia was gone. Only the elm remained, its hollow glowing faint red, its rope dangling loose, swaying though no wind blew. The crowd fled, scattering into the fields, into the woods, into their homes where no window dared face the tree. But the elm stood tall, its branches heavy with faces, its roots swollen with sorrow. And every man who had watched that morning carried the sound with him, a whisper that would not fade. The gallows remembers. The elm waits, and the dead do not forgive. The morning broke not with light but with wings, black wings, thousands of them, blotting the sky, thick as smoke, heavy as mourning cloth. The sound of them was not flight but a beating drum, the toll of feathers striking air like fists on doors. In Missouri, they said crows carried the souls of the unavenged. That when the gallows snapped a neck unjustly, the birds gathered to bear the spirit away, unless the spirit refused to go. That morning, the elm's branches sagged with their weight. The gallows rope swayed gently as though tugged by an unseen hand, and above it the crows circled tighter, closer, as if waiting for something to rise. The townsfolk would not step near. They watched from doorways, from barns, from behind curtains drawn thin. They whispered prayers, crossed themselves, spat into the dust. Some swore they heard words in the cawing, phrases torn apart by the wind. She is not gone. She walks still. She waits. The preacher tried to lift his voice above the sound, but when he opened his Bible, a crow dropped from the elm and landed upon the pulpit he had dragged outside, clawing the pages with its talons until the paper shredded like dry leaves. His sermon died in his throat. The judge sat pale in his chair, sweat soaking his collar. "It is only vermin," he muttered, though his eyes twitched to the branches where hundreds of beaks gleamed sharp as knives. Yet vermin do not gather as mourners. Vermin do not circle the dead. Vermin do not wait. The women of the town whispered that Celia's spirit had risen into the flock, that her eyes now stared through black feathers, watching all who had condemned her. The men spat and told them to hush, but none went near the elm. Not even the hangman, who had not been seen since the gallows fell. By noon, the sky was darker than dusk. The air smelled of iron, feathers, and rot. And then, the crows began to descend, not all at once, but in slow procession, as though called one by one. They dropped from the sky and settled along the roof lines, the fences, the windowsills. They lined the streets like sentries, their eyes glimmering with a human shine. Children screamed and were dragged inside. Horses reared, breaking free of their tethers, fleeing into the fields. The silence of the townsfolk deepened, for none dared strike at the birds, none dared scatter them. A single crow perched on the courthouse steps. Its wings were tattered, its beak chipped, as though it had torn itself from something harder than flesh. It opened its mouth, and instead of caw came a rasp. "We wait." Gasps rippled through those gathered. One man clutched his chest and fell, dead before he hit the ground. Another woman fainted, her shawl falling into the dust. But the crow did not move. Its black eyes stared, unblinking, and then came the others. They did not speak, but the beating of their wings became words. Each flap, each rustle, each crash of feather against feather wove a message the townsfolk could not mistake. You built the gallows. You tightened the rope. You watched, and you did not turn away. The townsfolk wept, some covering their ears, others begging forgiveness aloud. But the birds only beat their wings harder, the sky pulsing black, the sound rattling in bone and marrow. From the elm came a groan. Its hollow split wider, smoke curling outward like breath. And from within a shape stirred, not body, not spirit, but something caught between. The birds shrieked as one, their sound slicing the air like glass. And then the shape stepped free, Celia's figure, but not Celia. Her form wavered like flame, her skin pale as ash. Her eyes dark pits where light would not rest. She wore not rope nor chain, but feathers, a cloak of wings clinging to her shoulders, draping her like funeral cloth. The crows rose with her, swirling, a storm of black around her form. Their wings touched her, fused with her, bled into her until she was dressed wholly in them. The mourning dress. The crowd fell to its knees. Some prayed, some begged, some cursed, but none could deny what they saw. Celia raised her head. Her mouth opened, though no sound came. The silence was worse than any scream. Then the birds screamed for her. The sky shattered with their cries. Windows burst inward. Dust shook loose from rafters. The air grew heavy, choking, feathers falling like black snow. The preacher clutched his Bible, sobbing, "Lord, forgive us." The judge stumbled backward, face white, muttering, "It was lawful, lawful." The people scattered into alleys, into homes, slamming doors against the storm of wings. But doors cannot shut out judgment. The crows followed. Through chimneys, down rooftops, clawing through shutters. They poured into bedrooms, kitchens, cellars, their wings smothered lamps, plunging every house into dark. Their beaks tore bread, spilled milk, ripped blankets to shreds. Their voices filled every corner. She is not gone. She waits still. She wears the mourning dress. Through it all, the figure of Celia walks steady down the center of town, her feathers dragging along the dirt, leaving black streaks that glistened like tar. Her eyes sought faces, each man and woman who had turned away, each child taught to watch. Those her gaze fell upon swore their hearts stopped. Some fell dead, others fell senseless. All felt marked. When she reached the courthouse steps, she stopped. The single crow still sat there watching. It hopped once, then took wing, circling above her head. Others followed, rising in spirals until the air itself seemed to lift her. Her feet left the ground. Her wings spread. The elm groaned as though bowing before her, and the sky blackened fully. No sun, no cloud. Only wings. When the townsfolk dared peek from their homes, the square was empty. No gallows. No scaffold. No Celia. No crows. Only the elm remained, its branches heavy, its hollow smoking faintly, as though it had swallowed something whole. But each night after, the sound of wings returned, not outside but above their beds, scratching across their roofs, pressing against their shutters. Each night whispers in the cause, carrying words no wind could scatter. We wait still. We wear the mourning dress, and you are never unmarked. The rope never forgets. When it tightens, when it jerks, when it sings through the air, something lingers. Not just in the fibers, but in the silence that follows. Silence thick as tar, silence that weighs upon the chest, silence that waits. They believed if a body twitched too long, it meant the soul had bargained with something dark, that each spasm was not life resisting death, but death negotiating terms. And so, when Celia's body should have dropped, should have swung limp and silent, the people held their breath. They waited for the final stillness, for the settling hush that meant all was ended. But it never came. The silence was not relief, but dread. The rope groaned as though not yet satisfied. It creaked like a throat trying to form words, like sinew stretched beyond flesh. The knot twitched, shuddered, tightened again. The crowd shifted, unease rippling through them. A woman sobbed into her shawl. A child buried his face in his father's coat. The preacher clutched his Bible tighter, mouthing prayers that seemed to falter mid-verse. And then, something worse than twitching. The body did not move, but the shadow did. On the ground beneath the scaffold, the shape swung differently, as though another hung beside her. It stretched long and longer, swaying though the body itself remained stiff. Some swore it was two shadows tangled together. Others swore it was none at all. The rope groaned louder. A man whispered, "The elm is not finished." Another hissed, "Hush! Don't call it by name." But the word was already spoken, and the tree seemed to lean heavier over the square, its branches curling like fingers tightening a grip. The silence thickened until even the crows dared not cry. Then came the sound. Not a gasp, not a groan, not a voice, but a pulse. A single thud, low and deep like a heart striking wood. The scaffold boards trembled beneath the feet of the guards. The rope quivered. The silence pressed deeper, heavier, crushing. Someone whispered, "It is not her weight that pulls." The judge barked, "Cut her down! End this!" His voice cracked, a sharp fracture in the hush. But the hangman stood frozen, eyes fixed on the rope. His lips moved soundlessly. His hands twitched but did not lift the knife. The pulse came again, louder. The boards creaked. Dust rained from the beams above, and then another sound. A whisper, not from Celia's lips, not from the crowd, but from the rope itself. More. The word slithered like breath between fibers, a rasp against hemp. The crowd gasped as one, some stumbling backward, others clutching their ears. But the whisper came again, clearer, heavier. More. The preacher dropped to his knees, crying out, "Lord, preserve us." But the word drowned in the rope's demand, in the silence that was not silence but hunger. The rope stretched, fibers unraveling, groaning like a throat widening for another swallow. The body swayed, but the shadow below writhed. Its length twisted, snapping into shapes that did not belong to bone or flesh. It looked up at them, yes, up, like an open mouth yawning wide. Children screamed. Women fainted. Men cursed under their breath. The hangman finally moved, knife flashing in his shaking hand. He slashed at the rope once, twice. But before the blade cut through, the rope snapped itself, the body fell. But there was no thud, no weight striking earth. The figure dissolved before it struck the ground, unraveling into smoke, into feathers, into ash that scattered into the air. The silence deepened. The rope dangled empty, but it swung steady as if something unseen still hung there. The fibers twisted, groaned, stretched, and from the elm came a creak, low, guttural like laughter forced through wood. The crowd broke. They fled screaming into alleys and homes, dragging children, clutching rosaries, spitting prayers. The preacher ran with them, Bible pressed to his chest like a shield. Even the judge stumbled away, his gavel dropping from his hand, forgotten in the dust. But not all escaped. Some froze, rooted as though the earth itself clutched their ankles. They stared at the empty rope, unable to turn away. And as they stared, their own shadows began to twitch, a foot jerk, a hand convulse, a neck tilt at an impossible angle. Their bodies remained still, but their shadows danced, dangling, spasming as though strung by invisible cords. Their mouths opened in silent screams, and above them the rope whispered again. More. The elm's branches shook, scattering leaves like falling ash. The empty noose swung wider, creaking like bone against bone. And in the silence after the drop, the people of Missouri learned the cruelest truth. The gallows does not feed on one. It feeds on all who watch. The last to flee swore they saw the shadows lengthen, stretching up the scaffold, climbing the rope like smoke climbing flame. Swore they heard a second snap echo through the square, though no body hung, no neck broke, but the silence that followed told them otherwise. The rope was satisfied, for now, and when the wind carried the hush across the fields that night, the farmers swore their barns trembled, their cattle lowed, their children woke screaming, clutching their throats. The silence after the drop had followed them home. The story should have ended at the rope. That is where all tales of the condemned conclude, in the drop, in the silence, in the earth, but not hers. Celia's name did not sink with the body, nor with the ash, nor with the gallows shadow. It lingered, it spread, it walked. Folk tales said a wronged woman never lies quiet. She becomes a haint, rising from the place of her sorrow, walking until her name is cleared. And so it was in Missouri. On autumn nights, when the air smelled of ash and the wind carried smoke though no fire burned, mothers hushed their children at the doorways. "Stay inside," they whispered, rocking them with trembling hands. "Stay quiet, stay good. Celia walks." The fields bore witness. Travelers told of seeing her at dusk, a slim figure in a tattered dress, her hair loose as river weed, her eyes dark as the Missouri at midnight. Some claimed her skin was ash, her hands blistered, her breath the scent of smoke. Others swore she was whole and beautiful, the girl she had been before the stick, before the rope, before the trial. But all agreed. Her shadow was wrong. It lagged, behind her, swinging, jerking, twitching as though hung still from the elm. Farmers spoke of waking to find her footprints pressed in the frost outside their barns, leading from nowhere to nowhere, as if she circled them through the night. Dogs whined and clawed at doors, refusing to step out till morning. Those foolish enough to follow the print said they led to the crossroads, where the elm's roots drank deep where the gallows once stood. There, the print stopped. But the soil was always disturbed, churned as if by someone struggling, someone clawing upward, again and again. The preacher warned it was a devil's trick. He thundered from his pulpit that a girl who murdered could not become anything but damned. But his voice shook and his eyes darted to the corners of the church where feathers sometimes drifted down, though no birds nested in the rafters. The judge grew sickly. He shut himself in his home, curtains drawn, fire burning day and night. Servants whispered that he muttered Celia's name in his sleep, gasped for air as though a rope tightened around his throat. One morning, he was found dead in his chair, tongue black, eyes wide and staring at the ceiling. No doctor could name the cause. But those who saw swore they smelled smoke clinging to the body. The hangman vanished. Some said he fled west, others that he drowned in the river. But the truth lay whispered by children who dared the woods at night, that his shadow still swung. From the elm, kicking, jerking, even though no body was there, the town fell to silence. No one walked alone at dusk. No one lingered by the river. And when the crows circled thick above the fields, their wings darkening the sky, every window shuttered, every door barred. For they knew whose wings cloaked her shoulders. One autumn night, when the moon hung low and red, a child swore he saw her on the road. She walked barefoot, each step sinking into the dust though the wind was still. In her hand she carried the stick, splintered, blackened, the weapon and the witness both. The boy said she turned her head toward him. He said her mouth opened, but no sound came, only smoke, curling from her lips. He ran. He never spoke again. The old women told it plain. Until her name was cleared, until her wrong was righted, she would not rest. They said the elm would rot, the gallows would crumble, the rope would fray to nothing, but still she would walk. One winter, the town awoke to find the elm split down the middle, lightning having struck it in the night. Its hollow smoked, glowing faint as embers. The rope was gone. But still the footprints returned, pacing the crossroads, circling the stump. That year the harvest failed. Calves were born twisted, bread spoiled in the ovens, and every night the townsfolk smelled ash on the wind. The preacher tried to lead an exorcism, calling men to gather to shout prayers into the dark. But when their voices rose, so too did hers, though faint, though whisper thin. I walked still. The men dropped their candles. Some fled screaming into the night. The rest fell silent, their prayers swallowed by the whisper. Celia's name spread beyond Missouri. Travelers carried it downriver, across plains, through towns. Some told it as warning, some as curse, some as comfort, that even in death, a girl so wronged would not bow. But all agreed on one thing. On autumn nights, when the air smelled of ash, when the crows blackened the sky, when the wind carried a hush heavier than prayer, Celia walked. And still she walks. Some say she drifts along the Missouri, her reflection black upon the water, her eyes seeking. Others claim she passes through fields at dusk, her morning dress of crows flaring wide, blotting out the stars. But the most feared tale is the simplest, that she stands at the edge of every town where injustice festers, watching, waiting, her stick in hand, her shadow twitching. And when children stir restless at night, when mothers hush them quick with trembling voices, it is not monsters they warn against, not wolves, not witches. It is her. Stay inside, they whisper. Stay quiet. Stay good. For outside, on the road, on the river, in the field, the girl who would not rest walks, still, and every step she takes sounds like the toll of a bell, rung not for the dead but for the living, who know their turn will come.